Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook. Harmonious World is based on the premise of a quotation from Quincy Jones, which went something along the lines of, imagine what a harmonious world it would be if everyone shared a little of what they're good at. So I'm joined by musicians of all kinds and ages, and some who are experienced as well as those who are new on their journey. For this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by pianist Jeffrey Biegel, and I've discussed his music with composer and conductor Peter Boyer just a few months ago. What you're listening to is Mozart, K330, played by Jeffrey Biegel. And we'll be discussing all kinds of music that he plays. I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation. Hey, it's a real pleasure to talk to you, Jeffrey.
I'm so thrilled and I'm so happy, and thank you for taking the time to bring me into your world. And you do such incredible work, and I'm just thrilled to be part of it.
Oh, thank you. Honestly, the Rhapsody in Red, White and Blue that you did with Peter Boyer was just beautiful.
Well, thank you. Thank him.
Yeah. I have a funny feeling I need to go back over all of my stuff, but I think that you've actually been on some of the other recordings that I've, where I've talked to composers. I need to go back because you sent me a load of stuff that I need to listen to again.
Oh my gosh, I apologize, but I think it's good to have them.
Absolutely.
I think some of the ones that I've done in London area were the Leroy Anderson Piano Concerto with the BBC Concert Orchestra. That was back in 2006 with Leonard Slatkin conducting. They did the whole catalog of Leroy Anderson for the centennial of his birth. And that came out in 2008. And then in 2017, I recorded Kenneth Fuchs's Piano Concerto based on the three paintings called Spiritualist with London Symphony, also a Naxos recording. So that may have been the two. There were a few other Naxos recordings with orchestras, but those were the UK-based recordings.
Yes, and I think they're the ones that I've heard, before I started doing this podcast. But honestly, it's such a pleasure to have you on here because we can talk about, your whole kind of collection of music, and you've got a lot there.
There's a lot. I mean, there's of course the newer music. I thought, what, really document what you've done. I just, not for my own purposes, just for historical purposes, and to cover at least a 25-year range. And until the next few pieces are premiered, by the end of the year 2026, there will be 30 new pieces that I've done, and with at least 122 orchestras, I count 121, 22, over 25 years, and they're of different nature.
Yeah,
they're serious, like what you would expect of the canon of piano concertos through the evolution of that. Of course, Richard Daniel, Paul Lowell Lieberman, William Bolcom, Kenneth Fuchs, Lucas Richmond, and more, Theophanides. And then there's the lighter pieces by different composers that are more pop in nature, but not really like pop music. I mean, even famous pop icons like Neil Sedaka and Keith Emerson and Jimmy Webb and Melissa Manchester, Peter Tork, people who were famous for their pop careers in a way, who turned classical. They didn't turn classical, they turned to writing classically more serious music because they grew up with serious music. Solo music I've done by David Foster, even that. He was a serious pianist when he was a child. And then he just went on a different yellow brick road. He was on one color of yellow and he went to another one. And so he became famous for doing things, but not just in the music, but the business of it too, really helping other talents cultivate major careers in that world. And he wrote beautiful solo piano music. and that can be done with orchestra or solo. And so I really like embracing all the music because I used to feel limited because we were told to be. I mean, you'd be told by managers, and of course Peter Boyer's piece is fabulous. You're told by managers, no, well, if you play that, you can't play that. You know, you play Rhapsody in Blue, they're not going to have you play Beethoven. And my answer to that particular manager, who I did not work with at the time, but thought maybe he'd take me on, I said, "Well, that's okay because I already played the Beethoven Third Concerto with them, and now I'm going to play Rhapsody in Blue."
Yeah.
That was
Yeah,
about.
absolutely.
I mean, you can't be limited as a musician. It's like being stifled or silenced. And if you want to go in that direction, you go. And if you don't want to, you don't. I mean, I've done Bach recording, all the Mozart sonatas, Chopin. I love it. I just love all the music. That's how I was trained. And
Right.
that's one through the other, I think.
Yeah, and I think there's enough limitations imposed by various things. There can be limitations imposed by, your schedule that you might not be available to do something or whatever. But to have a musical limitation seems ridiculous.
Well, it's like speaking. If you have something to say about something that could be helpful, but they have a piece of tape over your mouth and you can't share it, and there's loss there on either end. I mean, not for me. I mean, so then I wouldn't be able to play it. But then when people look back to see what music had been created and brought out, uh, and I call it the evolution of music, then that's stifled. And you don't want to do that if somebody has a voice to help bring that evolution forward. And I just don't think music. People say, "Well, music changed," or someone changed. I said, "Yeah, first of all, nobody changes, and music doesn't change. Nothing changes; it just evolves." And I had a teacher, the Juilliard School at Del Marcus, she trained many of the pianists who had careers like Byron Janis and Stephen Huff, of course. And she used to say, like, I would say something like, I'll change. I promise I'll change that. It was just, no, no, no. People don't change. They just reveal themselves. It's quite a line, but that's how I find music to be. And that, by her saying that, was a seed of purpose, because when I've done all these different projects with composers, you're dealing with multiple personalities on different levels and coming from different backgrounds. They have their set of values, they have their sense of ego and everything. And yet, really, from the very beginning, I want to give them the sense that this is not about me. I'm not doing this for personal reasons. Who in their right mind would kind of bang on doors to raise money for composers to write new music? I mean, that's maybe they did it during Beethoven's time. The poor guy, Beethoven, went to his publisher and said, "Before I give you Opus 49, can I please get paid for Opus 25?"
Yeah.
He struggles for money. And so I do it because I really love it and I think it's important. But I say this isn't about me, and unfortunately, it's not about you either. It's not about us. This is about music and about bringing music out in the open that's new, because what's new today is going to be old tomorrow. So you have to
Yeah.
be somewhat crazy to do this, but it's a passion.
It is. You clearly really enjoy working with living composers. It
Yes,
seems like that's a real thing for you.
it started when I was 12. And I was studying with a wonderful pianist. He was an American pianist, Morton Estrin. He was the first to record all the Scriabin Opus 8 etudes and Rachmaninoff recordings. He was really a very fine teacher and really solid pianist. And one of his friends was Meyer Kupferman, who was an American composer. And he wrote some wonderful music. And he stayed pretty tonal considering everything around him atonal. And he wrote a piece in 1970 that was labeled 1973. I was turning 12. Maybe I was 11 when he gave me the music, or 12, I don't know. So he says, "Here, I don't have time to learn this. You do it." And he handed the music to me. Handwritten Sonata Mysticos. I have a recording from when I was a teenager on my website of this piece. It's a wonderful piece, actually. And going to play it for the composer as a little lad was, again, a seed planted for the future. And he would give me feedback on how to play it or what he meant or what he wanted. Beethoven isn't around to do that, but I gained the sense of the composer as a living, breathing entity. And fast forward to the 80s, we had to learn some new music for competitions. And those would be like everybody had to learn the new solo piece for a competition. One time in Norway, I met Harald Severud, famous Norwegian composer, who was in his 90s, grabbed my arm and he's like, do you know what those accents in the left hand are? Those sharp chord notes. Boom. I said, and I had already played it in the competition. I wish I saw him before. He says, those were gunshots during the war. The gun would go boom. I mean, you have to hear this from a composer.
Yeah.
And that was the pivotal moment. Then meeting Lalo Schifrin and playing his second piano concerto, recording it with him, playing Beethoven Emperor Concerto with him conducting. Life-changing, because it's a composer conducting another composer's music too. Beethoven, the reverence and things he would say to bring out that may have been overlooked because we know the piece too well. It's like the game of telephone. We all heard it before. But he saw it for what it was and brought things out. Other seeds planted. And then by the late 90s, that's when I started this journey of starting at the very beginning. It's like the Follow the Yellow Brick Road. I started right at the beginning and commissioned Ellen Taves Willick to write a new work to celebrate the Millennium Fantasy, but in a way that would bring a lot of orchestras together. So it was one of the largest consortiums of orchestras ever put together. It's like 27 or something. And I liked it. And after the premiere in Cincinnati with the symphony, I thought, I'm going to do another one. I'm going to do 50 states. And so I embarked on 50 States with Charles Strauss, who's still with us. He wrote Annie, Bye Bye Birdie, all the famous shows, but he was a pupil of Arthur Berger, Aaron Copland, and Nadja Boulanger. And I think with Darius Milhaud, too, I think he studied with this guy, born in the late 1920s. And so, no, it was he's 96, so do the math. So he wrote a Concerto America for me. I turned into a 50-state project. And I raised the money for that so the orchestras didn't have to pay what's called buy-ins toward his fee. And then 9/11 happened. I had two orchestras and I stopped it. I thought it wasn't the right time. And that's when I brought back Peter's, the 50-state project for that during COVID. I thought this is the right time. So there's just a long journey of all those years doing that. And what's interesting is that working with many living composers, it actually helps the traditional repertoire because one sees the music a little differently, a little bit fresher, hot off the press, and also the composers as living entities, not like a picture on my wall or the bust of Beethoven on the piano. You really feel a spiritual presence, if one wants to believe that, or at least to feel that they were people just like you and me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a very interesting way of looking at it, that by working with musicians now, it helps shed light on the musicians that are no longer with us. Whatever,
Absolutely.
wherever they were. It's really interesting. Nadia Boulanger's name comes up so many times with people, with a reverence for people who worked with her, or studied under her for a brief period or for a longer period or whatever. It's like Bernstein and it's like these people who figure, and they're just there, and it's lovely to kind of have those connections.
I agree. And it's interesting, even right up until the passing of Quincy Jones, he still talked about her as a teacher. Still did.
Yeah,
And
he
I
did
still
in
talk about Val Marcus because it was such a profound influence. These
yeah.
powerful people of just such passion and intensity and reverence for the music. And That's the most important thing, because if
Yeah.
you have that from the generations moving forward, it gets watered down, and then playing starts to become too fast, self-indulgent, just too fast. The world moves fast enough. Technology has enabled things to happen much too quickly, and it gets transferred into that, music making. I'm right now in California doing a new concerto by Adolphus Hailstork, very powerful piece. He's in his 80s and wrote it in his 80s. And the conductor is Carl St. Clair, who I just revere and respect, and I just think he's the best. And he has that, because he studied with Leonard Bernstein, he has that same commitment of respect. We were talking about that a little bit. And respect for the music, the composer, and for rhythm, because
Yeah.
rhythm 1,000 years ago is rhythm today, but life speed, even though your heart doesn't, of course, your heart beats the same way as it did in people 3,000 years ago, but the pace and rhythm and pulse of the world is much faster because of technology. And we get caught in the whirlpool of the moment, and it affects the way we do things. We tend to do things quicker because we get information, and technology is quicker. So we have to, as Carl has maintained his entire career in his now early 70s, is this commitment to respect of the rhythm and of pulse and of musical values of that music at the time. And even if it's brand new music, he treats it as though he would treat a Beethoven symphony that would have just been composed. And I love that. And I feed off that. I find that the ultimate. That's the ultimate. It's not about what you look like or what you wear, or you want to wear flashy clothing. You think it's going to enhance the experience. He doesn't do that. It's music. It's just about the music, not us. And that's why I love working with him. We've done several premieres together, and even Gershwin, we kind of covered it. But that's what I'm focused on. That's why I try to keep on that path. And that's why all these pieces have been, I think, successful. And I'd say that with humility, but the composers then are not worried about having to please anybody. They're just composing what they feel and what they want to express without it being from the outside in, really the inside out. And they've been great. All the pieces have been wonderful.
Yeah. You've mentioned Gershwin there, and I'd like to play at this point in the podcast an extract from the opening of the Red, White, and Blue Peter Boyers, because it's just beautiful. I love what you do there, and it's just really nice. how do you approach it when you have something, particularly when, you know, there's that link to Gershwin and there's Peter's current stuff, and how do you approach that?
Basically, I decided like late 2019 well, actually, it was in 2017. I was thinking about celebrating the centennial of Rhapsody in Blue, which would be 2024. And I thought, well, you have time, 7 years away. Then by July, no, it was like late 2019, before COVID hit. And I came up with the idea of, well, rather than just playing the Rhapsody in Blue, how about we celebrate it with a brand new piece? But what do you call it? I was going through all kinds of different ideas. And then I thought of what is the American flag, the colors, red, white, and blue. I said, Rhapsody in red, white, and blue. So I'm going to look it up. Nobody had used it before, which I always like to see. Usually in a Google search, you could see something will show up in a copyright office or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Wherever. But that didn't, and I thought that's the title. And I asked a few different composers, and they just felt, that's not my thing. And I asked Peter then, because I knew he was writing music that was so American in the way of it being, and he hates the word patriotic, but it is in a way that it identifies an American sound with being an American. And it's the kind of evolution, as I said before, from Copland and Gershwin through some of the lighter Broadway songs and music, and Bernstein and John Williams, and here we are. And of course, they all inspired him, but he comes up with something very unique. And at first, he said he didn't want to do it, or he's leery to do it because he didn't want to be compared to George Gershwin, which made sense. But I said to him, people compare people all the time. I said, but we're here now. In 2020 is when I spoke to him, and Gershwin's not. And I've just thought of that because I remember when I was asked at the age of like 28 to play the Emperor Concerto, and I never played it with Knoxville Symphony. And I said to the manager, I don't think I should play that yet. I'm young, and there are older pianists who play it. It's one of those, we were taught by my teacher who studied with Arthur Schnabel, of course, you have to be ready to play a certain piece. And he said, I said, well, it's like something Rubinstein you would ask to do. He says, well, he's not around anymore. You are, and you'll play a beautiful performance. So I did. And I really put my all into it. And the music critic from the paper, who I'm still friends with today after 36 years, he said it was everything one would expect from the great pianists and more. And I still say that to him. I said, I will never forget that line. I appreciate it till the day I die, because I wanted it to be something that at least was a respectful interpretation on the lines of what people would expect, and not like some kid coming out to play it for the first time. So I said to Peter, Bernstein and Gershwin are not here, or Copland, of course, John Williams is, and he loves all these composers. I said, something that Maurice Ravel said to George Gershwin when George Gershwin went to Paris to actually study with Ravel. He wanted to study the art of orchestration with him. And he had already been a pupil of great people, and Edward Kaleny, a pianist, and Charles Hambitzer. And Gershwin was a wonderful orchestrator. Rhapsody in Blue, he orchestrated basically by putting things in the piano score, and Grofé then arranged it and added to it. But Maurice Ravel says to him, Mr. Gershwin, I hear you do really well. You're very successful. You make lots of money. Can I just ask you how much money you made last year? And he said, he told him how he did. He was like, wow. He says, I think I should be studying with you. That's what he said to Gershwin. And then he says, well, I really want to learn to orchestrate, like what you do. He says, let me give you a word of advice, Mr. Gershwin. Better you should be a first-rate Gershwin than a second-rate Ravel.
That's a great way of putting it, isn't it?
I said to Peter, you know what? Better to be a first-rate Boyer than a second-rate Gershwin. Don't even think about Gershwin. Think about what you want to write. And it'll tip that. If there are little things about Rhapsody in Blue, or the style, or the Charleston, which he has he has that in the Rhapsody in Red, White, and Blue, which is great because it kind of triggers something in your mind to say, oh, that's from the 1920s, the Charleston. And then, there's all these jazzy things. Music has evolved since Gershwin's time. So in there, I don't know if Peter's talked about it much, but I'll say briefly, after he does all these big flamboyant things and jazzy blues chords and fancy licks on the piano, he has a little combo section that's piano, bass, and drums. And it's kind of like what Claude Bolling was doing out of France with his suites for flute and jazz, piano, trumpet, and cello, the combos. And also Vince Guaraldi, who was doing that for
Yeah.
Brown Peanuts specials. Those are all similar jazz combo pieces. And he has
Yeah.
that spot in the middle. But then he gets to this lyrical section, which is really incredible. And people ask me questions about that section. If you listen to the Rhapsody in Red, White, and Blue, da, 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 dee, dee, da, 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 dee, all of that. I said, well, when Gershwin's also an E major, they have the same key. He was clever with that. And it's a beautiful tonality for a lyrical melody like that. And Gershwin, of course, was songs, Broadway shows. They didn't have big cinematic movies with big soundtracks, like they do in the big screen, which evolved into that. So Peter's lyrical theme is more cinematic. It's more like you listen to it and you're in a glider going over Grand Canyon or Niagara Falls or Rocky Mountains, Mount Rushmore. You're flying over that. It's almost like you're taking a flying trip through America. And that's what's so beautiful. And he does these key changes that just go, you just grab your heart. It's just so beautiful. And then he just ties up the piece in a big dance, a big, like a jig kind of Gaelic thing. It's really fabulous. So that's Peters, and it's Peters. It's not like something Gershwin. Sometimes you say that's what Gershwin would have written if he were around today. It's not. It's very different. Similar, Lucas Richmond, incredible composer, his piano concerto. He also worked with Bernstein. You could hear little tips of the hat to Bernstein's style, but it's Lucas Richmond. It's gorgeous piano concerto. I really think that should be grabbed by many orchestras. So that's what they do. These composers are influenced by everything before. Another great piano concerto that was written for me was Giovanni Allevi. Now, a lot of Italian people who know his music know the shorter piano pieces. That he's like the Leroy Anderson of the Italian piano. All these little miniatures that are just beautiful. This piano concerto, he says, I'm not writing it for me, I'm writing it for you, and it's big piece like Liszt and Chopin, Rachmaninoff, and Keith Emerson. He loved Keith Emerson. So The Last Movement has a lot of that Emerson-like drive and rhythmic vitality. That's a great piece, the Levy Concerto. So there's a lot of influence of past composers in the hearts and in the souls of the living composers. And I like to tap into that. I really do, because I think that's what helps the music evolve. A little tip of the hat to the past, but definite vision for the future. And Peter accomplished that very well.
Indeed. Indeed. So what's the next project? What are you working on now?
Okay, so the Adolphus Hale Stork world premiere is tonight. Pacific Symphony, Carl St. Clair conducting. We'll do 3 concerts. Then traveling through the 50 states for the Boyer Rhapsody. Melissa Manchester, songwriter. She wrote a 5-movement suite called Awake for piano and orchestra. And it's really quite interesting, very interesting harmonies and melodies. People know Melissa Manchester as a singer-songwriter. Her father was a bassoonist in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, and she was steeped in the classics as a child and went to all the Metropolitan Opera rehearsals. I'm playing Jimmy Webb's concerto in that concert the night before, and Neil Sedaka's Manhattan Intermezzo on the same program with Melissa's piece in the summer at the Endless Mountain Music Festival. And then James Lee III, he goes by. James Lee is a wonderful composer here. He's currently composer in residence with the Baltimore Symphony. And I pitched an idea to him to write a piece in honor of the centennial of Gershwin's Concerto in F this year. It's 100 years old, 1925, 2025. And I said, concerto in whatever you want. So he said, oh, A. I said, concerto in A. Why A? He says, America, of course. I said, well, no brainers. I shouldn't even have asked. I felt a little silly. But, I wasn't sure. So that's a really wonderful three-movement piece. It has some blues in it, a little Charleston, da, 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 a little bit in there. But it's a colorful, wonderful piece with this very bluesy second movement. Oh, it's wonderful. And the third movement, very energetic. It's, one could say there's little flashes of this of I could say Hinastera, maybe some Latin American flavor in it. It's a wonderful piece. So that's going to be at the Louisiana Philharmonic in October. Then I'm working on a new project to create the first Carnival of the Animals in now, but for one piano and orchestra with different animals. And I brought in a wonderful composer who actually wrote a new Planets for me called The Planets Odyssey. That's another wonderful concerto. Daniel Pertu. And Daniel Pertu is going to write a piece. I actually come up with the titles. I try my best. You can't just say concerto, although Hailstork is concerto number 3, but he calls it The Way Things Really Are. So, yeah. A lot of, what's going on here? Very powerful piece. It's the juxtaposition to his second concerto, which is about the peaceable kingdom. So they have the good and the evil. But so I said to Dan, I have a title, but I have to check it out first. And it's called Animali Carnivali.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So the reason why, because I was thinking that I was looking up other words for carnival and animals, and I said, that just came up with nothing. That's what Saint-Saëns really. He took the best. Carnival of the Animals. You can't beat that. And any variation on that would just sound eh. But I like Animali Carnivali. Animali exclamation point, Carnivali exclamation point. And that comes from one of Ogden Nash's poems. He wrote the poems for all of the animals, for the Saint-Saëns. So at the very end, he says, and now we reach the grand finale. Animali Carnivali. And then he finishes at the finale, the last movement of the piece. So a poet friend of mine suggested that and it would be great to raise money to have him write the poems or somebody, I don't know, to check with the agent who manages the estate of Ogden Nash to make sure I could use those words. And I did. And they wrote back and says, you're fine, can copyright a title from the poem, just, no. You should be fine. So I kept that in writing. I printed it, and it's like, I have it because I don't want anyone to say to me, you can't use that. I said, well, I have permission to say it, so I can use those words. And it's really the best title for it because it's from the past, but it also is, I like a title to be uplifting, Animali Carnivali. Wow, what's that? And it's fun. So Dan is going to compose that. I'd like the premiere in the fall of 26. So that'll be the 140th anniversary of the Saint-Saëns work. And I'm just now trying to see which orchestra will be the lead orchestra and build it from there. Again, I raised the money for his fee, so the orchestras don't have to pay into it. Some orchestras can afford to pay a lot of money for commissions, others can't. So I try to raise the money so that it gives opportunities to orchestras to be part of a big project without having the burden of paying toward the composer's fee. They rent the music, so they'll rent any other music. They might still rent this, and be part of the project. Yeah. So.
Fantastic. Well, that sounds like a very busy few months ahead.
Yeah, it's tough because it's hard when you don't have the composer's fee, it's very difficult to push a project because at first I was promoting it to orchestras saying there'll be this amount toward the composer's fee if we have X number of orchestras. And now having raised it, I don't have to ask them for it. So I had sent like over 100 or 150 emails separately to different orchestra conductors and administrators. Just takes time. It's a
Yeah,
basic level to do it. But once I have an orchestra as the lead, I'll be able to then revisit all of those. I have the list of all of them, just say, this is the premier orchestra, no buy-ins. You don't have to pay anything toward the composer's fee. If you'd like to be part of it, you'll be listed in what will have the conductor's score, the inaugural performances, at least for a season or two. So you're part of even though you're not paying for it, you're part of helping the piece come alive. So,
fabulous.
yeah, try. We just try to, find new ways to do things to keep it going.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, Jeffrey. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Oh, thank you so much. I've enjoyed sharing this and hopefully come back to your land and play some of these pieces, bring some of these pieces over there.
I hope you enjoyed listening to that conversation with pianist Jeffrey Biegel. What a fascinating man. You're listening now to his version of Debussy's Clair de Lune. Please remember that you can find reviews now of albums, live gigs on the blog at hilaryseabrook.blogger.com, and all the links are in the show notes. I hope you enjoy listening to Harmonious World. Do get in touch with any comments you might have, and until the next episode, I hope you have a really, really harmonious week. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.